The Talented Mr. Ripley by Patricia Highsmith. Chapter 17. Tom went out before 8 in the morning to buy the papers. There was nothing. They might not find him for days, Tom thought. Nobody was likely to walk around an unimportant tomb like the one he had put Freddy behind. Tom felt quite confident of his safety, but physically he felt awful. He had a hangover, the terrible jumpy kind that made him stop halfway in everything he began doing, even stop halfway in brushing his teeth to go and see if his train really left at 10:30 or at 10:45. It left at 10:30. He was completely ready by 9, dressed and with his overcoat and raincoat out on the bed. He had even spoken to Senora Buffy to tell her he would be gone for at least 3 weeks and possibly longer. Senora Buffy had behaved just as usual, Tom thought, and had not mentioned his American visitor yesterday. Tom tried to think of something to ask her, something quite normal in view of Freddy's questions yesterday that would show him what Senora Buffy really thought about the questions, but he couldn't think of anything, and decided to let well enough alone. Everything was fine. Tom tried to reason himself out of the hangover because he had only the equivalent of 3 martinis and 3 Pernods at most. He knew it was a matter of mental suggestion and that he had a hangover because he had intended to pretend that he had been drinking a great deal with Freddy. And now, when there was no need of it, he was still pretending uncontrollably. The telephone rang and Tom picked it up and said "Pronto" sullenly. "Signor Greenleaf?" asked the Italian voice. "Si? Che parla le stazione polizia numero 83. Le un amico di un americano che si chiama Frederick Miles?" "Frederick Miles? Si," Tom said. The quick, tense voice stated that the corpse of Frederick Miles had been found that morning on the Via Appia Antica, and that Signor Miles had visited him at some time yesterday. Was that not so? "Yes, that is so." "At what time exactly?" "From about noon to perhaps 5 or 6 in the afternoon. I'm not quite sure." "Would you be kind enough to answer some questions? No, it is not necessary that you trouble yourself to come to the station. The interrogator will come to you. Will 11 o'clock this morning be convenient?" "I'll be very glad to help if I can," Tom said in a properly excited voice. "But can't the interrogator come now? It is necessary for me to leave the house at 10 o'clock. The voice made a little moan and said it was doubtful, but they would try it. If they could not come before 10 o'clock, it was very important that he should not leave the house. "Va bene," Tom said acquiescently and hung up. Damn them, he'd miss his train and his boat now. All he wanted to do was get out, leave Rome, and leave his apartment. He started to go over what he would tell the police. It was all so simple it bored him. It was the absolute truth. They had had drinks, Freddy had told him about Cortina, they had talked a lot, and then Freddy had left, maybe a little high, but in a very good mood. No, he didn't know where Freddy had been going. He had supposed Freddy had a date for the evening. Tom went into the bedroom and put a canvas which he had begun a few days ago on the easel. The paint on the palette was still moist because he had kept it under water in a pan in the kitchen. He mixed some more blue and white and began to add to the grayish-blue sky. The picture was still in Dickie's bright reddish browns and clear whites, the roofs and walls of Rome out of his window. The sky was the only departure because the winter sky of Rome was so gloomy even Dickie would have painted it grayish-blue instead of blue, Tom thought. Tom frowned just as Dickie frowned when he painted. The telephone rang again. "God damn it," Tom muttered and went to answer it. "Pronto!" "Pronto, Fausto," the voice said. "Come sta?" And the familiar bubbling juvenile laugh. "Oh, Fausto, bene grazie, excuse me." Tom continued in Italian in Dickie's laughing, absent voice. "I've been trying to paint. Trying." It was calculated to be possibly the voice of Dickie after having lost a friend like Freddy, and also the voice of Dickie on an ordinary morning of absorbing work. "Can you have lunch?" Fausto asked. "My train leaves at 4:15 for Milano." Tom groaned like Dickie. "I'm just taking off for Naples, yes, immediately, in 20 minutes. If he could escape Fausto now, he thought, he needn't let Fausto know that the police had called him at all. The news about Freddy wouldn't be in the papers until noon or later. "But I'm here in Roma. Where's your house? I'm at the railroad station," Fausto said cheerfully, laughing. "Where'd you get my telephone number?" "Ah, Laura, I called up information. They told me you didn't give the number out, but I told the girl a long story about a lottery you won in Mongebello. I don't know if she believed me, but I made it sound very important. A house and a cow and a well and even a refrigerator. I had to call her back 3 times, but finally she gave it to me. Allora, Dickie, where are you?" "That's not the point. I'd have lunch with you if I didn't have this train, but va bene, I'll help you carry your bags. Tell me where you are and I'll come over with a taxi for you." "The time's too short. Why don't I see you at the railroad station in about half an hour? It's the 10:30 train to Naples." "Okay. How is Marge?" "Innamorata di te," Fausto said, laughing. "Are you going to see her in Naples?" "I don't think so. I'll see you in a few minutes, Fausto. Gotta hurry. Arrivederci." "Arrivederci, Dickie, addio." He hung up. When Fausto saw the papers this afternoon, he would understand why he hadn't come to the railroad station. Otherwise, Fausto would just think they had missed each other somehow. But Fausto probably would see the papers by noon, Tom thought, because the Italian papers would play it up big. The murder of an American on the Appian Way. After the interview with the police, he would take another train to Naples after 4 o'clock so Fausto wouldn't still be around the station, and wait in Naples for the next boat to Majorca. He only hoped that Fausto wouldn't worm the address out of information too and decide to come over before 4 o'clock. He hoped Fausto wouldn't land here just when the police were here. Tom shoved a couple of suitcases under the bed and carried the other to a closet and shut the door. He didn't want the police to think he was just about to leave town. But what was he so nervous about? They probably hadn't any clues. Maybe a friend of Freddy's had known that Freddy was going to try to see him yesterday, that was all. Tom picked up a brush and moistened it in the turpentine cup. For the benefit of the police, he wanted to look as if he was not too upset by the news of Freddy's death to do a little painting while he waited for them, though he was dressed to go out because he had said he intended to go out. He was going to be a friend of Freddy's, but not too close a friend. Signora Buffy let the police in at 10:30. Tom looked down the stairwell and saw them. They did not stop to ask her any questions. Tom went back into his apartment. The spicy smell of turpentine was in the room. There were two, an older man in the uniform of an officer and a younger man in an ordinary police uniform. The older man greeted him politely and asked to see his passport. Tom produced it, and the officer looked sharply from Tom to the picture of Dickie, more sharply than anyone had ever looked at it before, and Tom braced himself for a challenge, but there was none. The officer handed him the passport with a little bow and a smile. He was a short middle-aged man who looked like thousands of other middle-aged Italians with heavy gray and black eyebrows and a short bushy gray and black mustache. He looked neither particularly bright nor stupid. "How was he killed?" Tom asked. "He was struck on the head and in the neck by some heavy instrument," the officer replied, "and robbed. We think he was drunk. Was he drunk when he left your apartment yesterday afternoon?" "Well, somewhat. We had both been drinking. We were drinking martinis and Pernod." The officer wrote it down in his tablet, and also the time that Tom said Freddy had been there, from about 12 until about 6. The younger policeman, handsome and blank of face, was strolling around the apartment with his hands behind him, bending close to the easel with a relaxed air as if he were alone in a museum. "Do you know where he was going when he left?" the officer asked. "No, I don't." "But you thought he was able to drive?" "Oh, yes, he was not too drunk to drive, or I would have gone with him." The officer asked another question that Tom pretended not to quite grasp. The officer asked it a second time, choosing different words, and exchanged a smile with the younger officer. Tom glanced from one to the other of them a little resentfully. The officer wanted to know what his relationship to Freddy had been. "A friend," Tom said. "Not a very close friend. I'd not seen or heard from him in about 2 months. I was terribly upset to hear about the disaster this morning." Tom let his anxious expression make up for his rather primitive vocabulary. He thought it did. He thought the questioning was very perfunctory and that they were going to leave in another minute or so. "At exactly what time was he killed?" Tom asked. The officer was still writing. He raised his bushy eyebrows. "Evidently just after the signor left your house, because the doctors believe that he had been dead at least 12 hours, perhaps longer." "At what time was he found?" "At dawn this morning by some workmen who were walking along the road." "Dio mio," Tom murmured. "He said nothing about making an excursion yesterday to the Via Appia when he left your apartment?" "No," Tom said. "What did you do yesterday after Signor Miles left?" "I stayed here," Tom said, gesturing with open hands as Dickie would have done, "and then I had a little sleep, and later I went out for a walk around 8 or 8:30. A man who lived in the house, whose name Tom didn't know, had seen him come in last night at about 8:45, and they had said good evening to each other." "You took a walk alone?" "Yes." "And Signor Miles left here alone? He was not going to meet anybody that you know of?" "No, he didn't say so." Tom wondered if Freddy had had friends with him at his hotel or wherever he had been staying. Tom hoped that the police wouldn't confront him with any of Freddy's friends who might know Dickie. Now his name, Richard Greenleaf, would be in the Italian newspapers, Tom thought, and also his address. He'd have to move. It was hell. He cursed to himself. The police officer saw him, but it looked like a muttered curse against the sad fate that had befallen Freddy, Tom thought. "So," the officer said, smiling, and closed his tablet. "You think it was," Tom tried to think of the word for hoodlum, "violent boys, don't you? Are there any clues?" "We are searching the car for fingerprints now. The murderer may have been somebody he picked up to give a ride to. The car was found this morning in the vicinity of the Piazza di Spagna. We should have some clues before tonight. Thank you very much, Signor Greenleaf." "Di niente. If I can be of any further assistance—" The officer turned at the door. "Shall we be able to reach you here for the next few days in case there are any more questions?" Tom hesitated. "I was planning to leave for Majorca tomorrow, but the questions may be, who is such and such a person who is a suspect," the officer explained. "You may be able to tell us who the person is in relation to the deceased." He gestured. "All right, but I do not think I knew Signor Miles that well. He probably had closer friends in the city." "Who?" The officer closed the door and took out his tablet. I don't know, Tom said. I only know he must have had several friends here, people who knew him better than I did. I am sorry, but we still must expect you to be in reach for the next couple of days, he repeated quietly as if there were no question of Tom's arguing about it, even if he was an American. We shall inform you as soon as you may go. I am sorry if you have made travel plans. Perhaps there is still time to cancel them. Good day, Senor Greenleaf. Good day. Tom stood there after they had closed the door. He could move to a hotel, he thought, if he told the police what hotel it was. He didn't want Freddy's friends or any friends of Dickie's calling on him after they saw his address in the newspapers. He tried to assess his behavior from the Polizia's point of view. They hadn't challenged him on anything. He had not acted horrified at the news of Freddy's death, but that jibed with the fact that he was not an especially close friend of Freddy's either. No, it wasn't bad, except that he had to be on tap. The telephone rang, and Tom didn't answer it, because he had a feeling that it was Fausto calling from the railroad station. It was 11:05, and the train for Naples would have departed. When the phone stopped ringing, Tom picked it up and called the Inghilterra. He reserved a room and said he would be there in about half an hour. Then he called the police station. He remembered that it was number 83, and after nearly 10 minutes of difficulties because he couldn't find anyone who knew or cared who Richard Greenleaf was, he succeeded in leaving a message that Senor Richard Greenleaf could be found at the Albergo Inghilterra in case the police wanted to speak to him. He was at the Inghilterra before an hour was up. His 3 suitcases, 2 of them Dickie's and 1 his own, depressed him. He had packed them for such a different purpose, and now this. He went out at noon to buy the papers. Every one of the papers had it. Americano murdered on the Via Appia Antica. Shocking murder of Ricissimo Americano Frederick Miles last night on the Via Appia. Via Appia murder of Americano without clues. Tom read every word. There really were no clues, at least not yet. No tracks, no fingerprints, no suspects. But every paper carried the name Herbert Richard Greenleaf and gave his address as the place where Freddy had last been seen by anybody. Not one of the papers implied that Herbert Richard Greenleaf was under suspicion, however. The papers said that Miles had apparently had a few drinks, and the drinks in typical Italian journalistic style were all enumerated and ran from Americanos through Scotch whiskey, brandy, champagne, even grappa. Only gin and Pernod were omitted. Tom stayed in his hotel room over the lunch hour, walking the floor and feeling depressed and trapped. He telephoned the travel office in Rome that had sold him the ticket to Palma and tried to cancel it. He would have 20% of his money back, they said. There was not another boat to Palma for about 5 days. Around 2 o'clock, his telephone rang urgently. "Hello," Tom said in Dickie's nervous, irritable tone. "Hello, Dick. This is Van Houston." "Oh," Tom said, as if he knew him, yet the single word conveyed no excess of surprise or warmth. "How have you been? It's been a long time, hasn't it?" the hoarse, strained voice asked. "Certainly has. Where are you?" "At the Histler. I've been going over Freddy's suitcases with the police. Listen, I want to see you. What was the matter with Freddy yesterday? I tried to find you all last evening, because Freddy was supposed to be back at the hotel by 6. I didn't have your address. What happened yesterday?" "I wish I knew. Freddy left the house around 6. We both had taken on quite a lot of martinis, but he looked capable of driving, or naturally I wouldn't have let him go off. He said he had his car downstairs. I can't imagine what happened, except that he picked up somebody to give them a lift and they pulled a gun on him or something." "But he wasn't killed by a gun. I agree with you. Somebody must have forced him to drive out there, or he blotted out because he'd have had to get clear across town to get to the Appian Way. The Hassler's only a few blocks from where you live." "Did he ever black out before at the wheel of a car?" "Listen, Dickie, can I see you? I'm free now, except that I'm not supposed to leave the hotel today." "Neither am I." "Oh, come on. Leave a message where you are and come over." "I can't, Van. The police are coming over in about an hour, and I'm supposed to be here. Why don't you call me later? Maybe I can see you tonight." "All right, what time?" "Call me around 6. "Right. Keep your chin up, Dickie." "You too." "See ya," the voice said weakly. Tom hung up. Van had sounded as if he were about to cry at the last. "Pronto," Tom said, clicking the telephone to get the hotel operator. He left a message that he was not in to anybody except the police and that they were to let nobody up to see him. Positively no one. After that, the telephone did not ring all afternoon. At about 8, when it was dark, Tom went downstairs to buy the evening papers. He looked around the little lobby and into the hotel bar whose door was off the main hall, looking for anybody who might be Van. He was ready for anything, ready even to see Marge sitting there waiting for him. But he saw no one who looked even like a police agent. He bought the evening papers and sat in a little restaurant a few streets away reading them. Still no clues. He learned that Van Houston was a close friend of Freddy's, age 28, traveling with him from Austria to Rome on a holiday that was to have ended in Florence, where both Miles and Houston had residences, the papers said. They had questioned 3 Italian youths, 2 of them 18 and 1 16, on suspicion of having done the horrible deed, but the youths had been later released. Tom was relieved to read that no fingerprints that could be considered fresh or usable had been found on Miles' bellissima Fiat 1400 convertible. Tom ate his costoletta di vitello slowly, sipped his wine, and glanced through every column of the papers for the last-minute items that were sometimes put into Italian papers just before they went to press. He found nothing more on the Miles case, but on the last page of the last newspaper he read, Barca affondata con macchie di sangue trovata nell'acqua poco fondo vicino San Remo. He read it rapidly, with more terror in his heart than he had felt when he had carried Freddy's body down the stairs or when the police had come to question him. This was like a nemesis, like a nightmare come true, even the wording of the headline. The boat was described in detail, and it brought the scene back to him. Dickie sitting in the stern at the throttle, Dickie smiling at him, Dickie's body sinking through the water with its wake of bubbles. The text said that the stains were believed to be bloodstains, not that they were. It did not say what the police or anybody else intended to do about them. But the police would do something, Tom thought. The boatkeeper could probably tell the police the very day the boat was lost. The police could then check the hotels for that day. The Italian boatkeeper might even remember that it was two Americans who had not come back with the boat. If the police bothered to check the hotel registers around that time, the name Richard Greenleaf would stand out like a red flag, in which case, of course, it would be Tom Ripley who would be missing, who might have been murdered that day. Tom's imagination went in several directions. Suppose they searched for Dickie's body and found it. It would be assumed to be Tom Ripley's now. Dickie would be suspected of murder, ergo Dickie would be suspected of Freddy's murder too. Dickie would become overnight a murderous type. On the other hand, the Italian boatkeeper might not remember the day that one of his boats had not been brought back. Even if he did remember, the hotels might not be checked. The Italian police just might not be that interested. Might not. Tom folded up his papers, paid his check, and went out. He asked at the hotel desk if there were any messages for him. Si, signor, questo. The clerk laid them out on the desk before him like a card player laying down a winning straight. 2 from Van, 1 from Robert Gilbertson. Wasn't there a Robert Gilbertson in Dickie's address book? Check on that. 1 from Marge. Tom picked it up and read its Italian carefully. Signorina Sherwood had called at 3:35 p.m. and would call again. The call was long distance from Mongebello. Tom nodded and picked them up. Thanks very much. He didn't like the look of the clerk behind the desk. Italians were so damn curious. Upstairs, he sat hunched forward in an armchair, smoking and thinking. He was trying to figure out what would logically happen if he did nothing and what he could make happen by his own actions. Marge would very likely come up to Rome. She had evidently called the Rome police to get his address. If she came up, he would have to see her as Tom and try to convince her that Dickie was out for a while as he had with Freddy. And if he failed, Tom rubbed his palms together nervously. He mustn't see Marge, that was all. Not now with the boat affair brewing. Everything would go haywire if he saw her. It would be the end of everything. But if he could only sit tight, nothing at all would happen. It was just this moment, he thought, just this little crisis with the boat story and the unsolved Freddie Miles murder that made things so difficult. But absolutely nothing would happen to him if he could keep on doing and saying the right things to everybody. Afterward, it would be smooth sailing again. Greece or India, Ceylon, someplace far, far away where no old friend could possibly come knocking on his door. What a fool he had been to think he could stay in Rome. Might as well have picked Grand Central Station or put himself an exhibition in the Louvre. He called the Stazione Termini and asked about the trains for Naples tomorrow. There were 4 or 5. He wrote down the times for all of them. It would be 5 days before a boat left from Naples for Mallorca, and he would sit the time out in Naples, he thought. All he needed was a release from the police, and if nothing happened tomorrow, he should get it. They couldn't hold a man forever without even any grounds for suspicion, just in order to throw an occasional question at him. He began to feel he would be released tomorrow, that it was absolutely logical that he should be released. He picked up the telephone again and told the clerk that if Miss Marjorie Sherwood called again, he would accept the call. If she called again, he thought, he could convince her in 2 minutes that everything was all right, that Freddy's murder didn't concern him at all, that he had moved to a hotel just to avoid annoying telephone calls with total strangers and yet still be within reach of the police in case they wanted him to identify any suspects they picked up. He would tell her that he was flying to Greece tomorrow or the next day, so there was no use in her coming to Rome. As a matter of fact, he thought he could fly to Palma from Rome. He hadn't even thought of that before. He lay down on the bed, tired but not ready to undress, because he felt that something else was going to happen tonight. He tried to concentrate on Marge. He imagined her at this moment sitting in Giorgio's or treating herself to a long, slow Tom Collins in the Miramare bar and debating whether to call him up again. He could see her troubled eyebrows, her tousled hair as she sat brooding about what might be happening in Rome. She would be alone at the table, not talking to anyone. He saw her getting up and going home, taking a suitcase and catching the noon bus tomorrow. He was there on the road in front of the post office, shouting to her not to go, trying to stop the bus, but it pulled away. The scene dissolved in swirling yellow grayness, the color of the sand in Mongebello. Tom saw Dickie smiling at him, dressed in the corduroy suit that he had worn in San Remo. The suit was soaking wet, the tie a dripping string. Dickie bent over him, shaking him. "I swam," he said. "Tom, wake up. I'm all right. I swam. I'm alive." Tom squirmed away from his touch. He heard Dickie laugh at him, Dickie's happy, deep laugh. "Tom!" The timbre of the voice was deeper, richer, better than Tom had even been able to make it in his imitations. Tom pushed himself up. His body felt leaden and slow, as if he were trying to raise himself out of deep water. "I swam!" Dickie's voice shouted, ringing and ringing in Tom's ears as if he heard it through a long tunnel. Tom looked around the room, looking for Dickie in the yellow light under the bridge lamp in the dark corner by the tall wardrobe. Tom felt his own eyes stretched wide, terrified, and though he knew his fear was senseless, he kept looking everywhere for Dickie, below the half-drawn shades at the window and on the floor on the other side of the bed. He hauled himself up from the bed, staggered across the room, and opened a window. Then the other window. He felt drugged. Somebody put something in my wine, he thought suddenly. He knelt below the window, breathing the cold air in, fighting the grogginess as if it were something that was going to overcome him if he didn't exert himself to the utmost. Finally, he went into the bathroom and wet his face at the basin. The grogginess was going away. He knew he hadn't been drugged. He had let his imagination run away with him. He had been out of control. He drew himself up and calmly took off his tie. He moved as Dickie would have done, undressed himself, bathed, put his pajamas on, and lay down in bed. He tried to think about what Dickie would be thinking about. His mother. Her last letter had enclosed a couple of snapshots of herself and Mr. Greenleaf sitting in the living room having coffee, the scene he remembered from the evening he had coffee with them after dinner. Mrs. Greenleaf had said that Herbert had taken the pictures himself by squeezing a bulb. Tom began to compose his next letter to them. They were pleased that he was writing more often. He must set their minds at rest about the Freddie affair because they knew of Freddie. Mrs. Greenleaf had asked about Freddie Miles in one of her letters, but Tom was listening for the telephone while he tried to compose the letter, and he couldn't really concentrate.